Hello, and welcome back to Parley, the show where you folks support the other stuff I make by paying me monthly to talk about the topic of your choice. And this month, True Mr.FOoT has requested some discussion about weird story, superiority. Well, I'm not sure I agree with that, but we're going to get into it. Now, Mr. Foot, at the bottom of this parlay, you said, there is no need to read this whole request in the parlay video. Feel free to cut it down to just the question, as the rest consists of just explanations, clarifications, and examples. I think they're good clarifications and examples, and I would have by default just read the parlay request because I think it's good. I think it's well written. I think it's helpful. It's long. But here's what I'm going to do. I will do it in my own words, but at the end of the parlay, I am going to read what Mr. Foot wrote, and I'll also post it in the description. You all could decide what you think. For those of you who, probably this is most useful to people who actually have parlay, who are commissioning parlay, you could think about this. If you'd like the option to say, like, just word it yourself, Zandy, fine, I can do that. But you can decide, like, do you think this one was better or worse? Do you want to do your own that way or not? We can just use it as a point of experimentation. So in my own words, what's this parlay? The idea basically is that when a story uses things that are, I'm going to say, like, maybe more comfortable, when the story is presented more competently, this is a movie, a book, a TV show, whatever, a video game narrative, the more familiar it is, and to some extent that's also like the more narrative devices it might use. I'm going to give a lot of examples of that, but basically, like, the more structured, I almost want to say, or the more competently it's made, the more polished, the more familiar, all those things, the less we as the audience need to engage with that piece of work to basically understand it. Whether or not there is deeper meaning in the piece of work, we simply don't need to try as hard to access it because it's just easy to follow along with the story. Now, this is a good thing in some way. It makes it relaxing, entertaining, but there is a drawback there, right? Like, there's a lack of a need to look deeper, and there may or may not be complexity looking us in the face that we will simply not chase, because why would we? There's no need. We don't need to do that. Looked at with a critical eye, you might then see a complexity or lack thereof. But if you don't have a particular reason to do that, because the story doesn't ask for it from you, basically, then you may or may not feel that way. You follow me so far? There's something kind of weirdly inferior about a story that has a word cloud of good things about it when it's presented. And likewise, if you have a story that's just kind of weird and janky, maybe just kind of bad in some ways, not structured entirely coherently, it makes you ask, at the very least, why? Like, what? But why, though? Why was this done? And that very act, it's kind of a bad thing about the story, but it does kind of automatically or accidentally make you engage. And if there is then deeper meaning in the story, you will then find it, which is an odd paradox. That's the idea of the parlay. That's the premise. Now, already, get this out of here. I think it's pretty clear, to me anyway, that these stories are not better, but they're good at something very different. Yes, I think if you want your audience to engage with the deeper themes of your story, it behooves you not to rely on genre conventions, on pomp and circumstance a little bit, because that will make the audience engage with the story more. And if you want that, great. There is value to stories that don't ask for that, but you might as well not worry too much about there being deeper themes, or maybe you'd like to kind of hit the audience over the head with them a little bit, because you're not inviting the audience to engage more deeply when you write a story that relies on all those conventions. Let me give you two example stories. These are both things I'm consuming right now, and I'll give you them as examples. Okay, so one of them, the setting is a floating island on the ocean, and it's technologically advanced, and they've got some super powerful energy resource that is apparently way more efficient, but there's suggestions that it has a dark secret. And indeed, the city is plagued by corruption and capitalism, which are the same thing, and demons, which are the same thing as those other two things. And our protagonist is basically a mercenary who deals with the demons while the government suppresses their existence to prevent bad press about this new energy source. Now, our protagonist is able to suppress these demons, even though other mercenary groups have trouble with them, because he has a lovely looking demon girlfriend who, when he kisses her, she extracts his memories and turns them into power. It's implied that when he runs out, he won't have any more to basically pay her, and it'll be over or whatever. If you have watched the kind of story that this is before, a lot of these details are not very surprising. The idea that the character burns themselves out to achieve their goal, and there's some kind of paradox, like the reason they're achieving their goal is being destroyed as they achieve their goal, is just kind of a normal, timeless theme. Causing more damage than you fix, or revenge not being worth it, or those themes, right? Very expected. We're all familiar with them. We know the stakes for those themes. The idea that there's this futuristic society, it's got this great energy resource, but like capitalism, though, you know, you almost don't have to explain. It's like, of course, we live in that society. We know that, you know. And so the story doesn't need to explain that. Now, this story doesn't have like much deeper meaning. It is kind of stupid, but I mean, okay, like it's not boring necessarily, but if you try to chew, you have nothing to do but swallow, if I could say it that way. Now, if you're just hungry, that's one thing, but if you want something tasty, it just isn't, you know. Likewise, we have another story. This is one about a kid who doesn't want to go to sleep at night, and he just can't be bothered anymore. His life is meh. I can't be bothered. And so he just sneaks out. He's a middle school kid. And he meets someone while he's snuck out. And she says, you know, people basically don't go to sleep because they are not satisfied with their day, right? Why don't you just stay up until you're happy with your day? Not a bad way to live life, which, like, it sort of is a bad way to live life. But anyway, you can see already in the setup, it's kind of not simpler, but like it's a particular setup. There's something to set up. We don't implicitly understand, like, wait a minute, what will happen in this story? Are there like no characters because he's up at 4 a.m.? You know, like how does this work? How do you make this story work? And it takes a bit of effort to understand the mechanism by which the story will function. And there isn't as clear of a villain or an adversary, or there's nothing explicitly clearly negative going on. You could have the story be about his school life and how he's got insomnia all the time, but they basically just don't show that. That would be too easy. I think that's must be what they think. Now, if you happen to know these stories, I actually don't think that second story is that deep either, really, but it is using a format that asks more of you, the audience, that catches you off your guard and says, wait, what's going to happen in this story? And indeed, it's weird. Like, you could almost say a little dry, not very actiony, a little slow, I might say. Character beats happen, but a lot of it is the beautiful night sky. And if you don't just want to look at something pretty and think, huh, I kind of relate to this. How nice. You know, it's not filling. It's a meal where you chew but don't swallow, rather than a meal where you swallow but don't chew. And I think they're just good at different things. I gave the example of a comparative coffee tasting recently, where I had my folks who normally drink their coffee, you know, with milk and sugar or whatever. They're used to dark roasted coffees that, if you're not familiar with that thing about coffee, very simple. Most of you probably drink some coffee and you can relate to it. The dark roasted coffees have this bold, strong, a bit bitter flavor that stands up well to adding stuff into them. And lighter roasted coffees have, I really think, more flavors, but they are lighter and more, not sour, but acidic. Sour would be just badly brewed coffee, but definitely brighter, I would say. A little touch of acid. More like a fruit juice rather than chocolate, for example, but definitely still some of both. And indeed, high quality dark roasted coffee has a bit of fruit too. It can be hard to find when you put stuff in it, but when tasting these coffees black, most people prefer the lighter roasted coffees simply because they are better suited to be drank black. The darker roasted coffee has synergy with adding milk and sugar. It has a flavor suitable, ready to be competing with those other flavors, whereas those light roasted coffees just don't. Personally, I think they taste a bit like fruit milk. They also just don't trigger the part of my brain that says I'm drinking delicious coffee. They trigger the part of my brain that says I'm drinking fruit milk. Like, why am I drinking fruit milk? Which maybe it's fine. Like, maybe that's good. It's not like gross tasting, but it is different. It definitely isn't a wake you up or comforting drink. It tastes more like a dessert drink. By the same token, it would be silly to say that Starbucks and its big desserty beverages are bad, but they're also not really coffee as per se. They're just something different. It would be silly to say that one is bad or good or right or wrong. That just means nothing. But they are clearly not trying to achieve the same goal. The Starbucks drinks do not taste like coffee. They taste like confection where coffee is an ingredient. Delicious, but not like black coffee. They're a significant departure. Why even try to have particular coffee flavors if they're going to be competing against so many other things? They're going to need a big, blunt, bold flavor that can punch through that, or they won't even taste like any. I think they already don't taste like any coffee. This is obviously completely fine. They clearly taste like things. It's not like people who like Starbucks fancy desserty drinks have no taste. In fact, those same people actually add flavor syrups to the drink because they like how they taste, but they don't taste the same as that kind of coffee. They're just different. One is not better than the other. Now, I do think that those lighter roasted coffees are attempting to give you flavors to chew on. To be blunt, though, as someone who drinks that kind of coffee a lot, as often as not, I do not like it. Like, it's deeply interesting. I drink it and think, what a unique taste. I have never had anything like this before. What a bizarre, almost alien taste. And I really find that fun. I think it's interesting. Like trying a new country's food. But it's quite possible that you wouldn't like it, right? But it would be, I don't know. I mean, maybe some of you don't enjoy trying, a new food, for example, and that's fine. But it would be silly to say that that's like not worth it or something. The goal is just different. And I think it's the same here. Enough of this coffee example, but I hope that kind of makes sense. That's what I think about this on the surface. Now, that's overall probably a pretty lukewarm take, right? You say, the weird stories are better, and I'm saying, yeah, they're better at this, but the other stories are better at that. Like, yeah, whatever, obviously, right? But that is how I think of it. I think that they're just different. I think the worst thing people do is categorize. Just being able to say, like, look, the point of this is just something else, is good. Very much like video game genres. Just because a game employs a certain structure doesn't mean it's going for the same feeling or trying to achieve the same things. Somebody asked me recently on a stream if I recommended Hades or Cult of the Lamb, and what I should have said, now that I've played both those games, is you shouldn't compare those games. That's not useful. Unless you know that they're really different and you're trying to decide which experience you want to have. Those are not games that are attempting to do almost any similar things. If you want one game, you almost certainly, we know nothing about whether you want the other. They're not trying to do the same thing. I don't think it's the same thing as our example here, where one of them is the chew don't swallow and the other one is the swallow don't chew. But they are things that maybe it's not helpful to compare these. Maybe calling both of these a movie isn't good. Maybe, you might decide, we're going to react by giving them terms. We're going to make a new word for the movies that are a roller coaster ride and the movies that are a piece of saltwater taffy that you chew on. Movies that are trying to get you to look for the thing and movies that aren't. Now, personally, I think that kind of is already a thing. A lot of the time, if something is heavily marketed and it's available in the big cinemas, people kind of just assume that it is that kind of movie. They're expecting to enjoy it because it will be made accessible. You can assume this in general when something is popular. If it's spicy and it's in America, it's not going to be that spicy if you have built up some spice tolerance, because if it was, it wouldn't sell. It just, people would not buy it. It would not be suited for the people. And that's not bad. That's ridiculous. How could that be bad? But it is a goal. It has a specific goal. Nothing is just good. That can't be. Things have goals. That being said, I think this is where this conversation gets a bit more interesting, because people tend to assume this thing is this way, that thing is that way. A lot of talking past each other, a lot of misunderstanding occurs where somebody might make a popular film that maybe even isn't intending to be popular, it just kind of gets popular. And they were expecting people to watch it in a quiet, small cinema where people tend to go to plan to think about their movie. And so they get frustrated when people don't, when it's like, but that's not how, you can't just assume that, I think you kind of have to structure your work that way. But I think a lot of artists plan for their work to be given a certain benefit of the doubt or not. And that can cause some misunderstanding. Why even bother introducing things at such length? We just want to see the action. But like, that's not what the writer cared about. But maybe they didn't telegraph that. You see what I'm trying to say? Maybe as another example, I've had people watch some of my build videos or stream archives, and they say, this is such a waste of time. Just show me the build in the first 5 minutes. Why is there 2 hours before you show the build? Well, because that's not the goal. You believe that there is no possible goal other than the one you want, which makes you, none of you viewers, which makes this person ignorant and idiot. But forgive them, our society acts like there aren't different goals. Where are they, after all? There's only one stated, or none stated. So don't we all have the same goal? I don't know. But we don't. And of course, the reason I'm explaining is because the focus of the stream isn't on a build. It's on the process of making a build. I mean, for most of you, you're saying obviously, right? But for a lot of people, they simply are not aware, maybe, that there is like any purpose, I guess. Or maybe they think like this stream is because people don't get, they like have to understand, or they want to sound smart by being able to explain like why the build is that way, and they don't understand that there actually is an like objectively a benefit. It's not an affectation. You can have more fun by understanding the builds you enjoy better. It's not so you can brag or seem smart. And if you use my videos that way, please stop watching them. But I can't stop people. Of course, there are people that do that. Likewise, there are people who don't just want a build so they can go play. They want a build so they have the right answer and they can tell people they have a simple right answer. It's not about having more fun. It's not about them wanting a simple answer. It's about them wanting a blunt answer that they can tell people they're wrong with. And that is also bad. But of course, those are both perversions of the actual positive use case for those two approaches. It is valuable to simply give an example of a build in a game, and it is valuable to discuss how you arrived at a build in a game. Those things just have different goals, and both of them also have perverted corruption versions of those goals that make them look really stupid. There are people in the world who think that the Avengers movies, I used Endgame as an example earlier, are just foolish. Like, it's just stupid, which of course is sort of missing the forest for the trees, or you're kind of seeing past the point of that thing. It isn't a good fit for that person because they don't want that thing. I think the real meat and potatoes, though, is like, but why? Why, though? Why do some people want one thing and not the other? I do think a lot of this is the point I just left on. The thing about like a lot of people maybe misunderstand the point of a thing. They think they do know the point of the artsy movies, but they think the point is the bad version of the point of those movies, not to enjoy a discussion and think about life and appreciate the beauty of a moment. They think the point is to like sound smart and talk at a cocktail party and sound like an asshole. They don't know that there are non-malign uses for that thing, or they think that's why those people are doing that. And they've never really engaged and checked. After all, it is difficult to engage and enjoy the thing if you don't have people to do that with you that don't have the toxic version of that goal. Take coffee tasting as an example again. Without a very crafted example, the point of which is an ego death only for the sake of understanding, no self-satisfaction. I don't care if you like the coffee. I don't even want to be part of it. If I could not be present, if I could not even be known to be the person who instigated the thing, I would be happy to. I don't want you to think that I'm showing off my coffee. I just want people to get to experience what they like. And if somebody enjoys the thing and it's readily available, wouldn't it be great if they could just have it? I don't know, like that would be nice, right? And for people to act like, I have to drink black coffee and it's got to be dark roasted because dark roasted coffee is stronger. It isn't. And it will make me look manly. It doesn't. People drink these things for the wrong reasons. Like they simply don't know what they would enjoy the most. They're doing it for some oversimplified, shortcut reason. And without someone who's trying to get them what they want while also mimicking that person's experience, they're not going to find something they enjoy more. They're going to get some specialty coffee nerd who gives them a very light roasted coffee that tastes like lime juice, that is interesting, probably, but will be disgusting to the person who's constantly drank, their Starbucks drinks. That coffee is talking past that person. That is not a useful example for them. You would need to, it takes a lot of effort to do this. That's my point. And without insider knowledge and a kind of death of your own preferences, which pretty much nobody has, I'm as biased as anyone else, you really can't introduce someone to that thing. So I do think that's a lot of it. I think that's a lot of why people misunderstand or believe they understand, but it's the oversimplified, stupid version, the use of different kinds of media. More of a swallow but don't chew, a more filling, satisfying, relaxing piece of media, and more of a chew don't swallow, to think about it, something that wants you to engage with it, that's taking your mental energy for a ride, that type of media. There's clearly a point to both of them, but I think it's obvious why people don't cross over that often, or believe they understand one or the other, but they really don't, I don't think. I think it's more than that, though. I do. Something I've always been baffled by is this idea that people appear to want various arbitrary amounts of that mental chewing in their life. I enjoy that show I gave as an example early in the parlay that is kind of campy, silly, but it's like fun or whatever. I'm enjoying laughing at it, or am I laughing with it? It's laughing at itself too. I hope, anyway. It's silly, ridiculous. It's kind of hot garbage, but there's something I'm finding fun about it. I think it's funny that the whole show is warped. This is the example where they kiss and she takes his memories, and then that gives her power. There's a point in the middle of the show, minor spoilers, but if you don't know what this thing is, it's a very minor spoiler. It's revealed that she's been choosing which memories of his she eats, and she keeps picking like his past lovers because she's actually kind of attached to him, even though it's like supposedly just a bargain or whatever for power. And she keeps eating the memories of his past lovers, who they then run into. And he's like, "Oh, hey, nice to meet you." And the person's like, "We slept together. What are you saying?" Which, like, that's so stupid. Like, I can't believe they undermine the dramatic stakes of which didn't exist, of the entire show just to give us that like ridiculous punchline. But it's actually kind of hilarious. Like, I found that kind of fun. Like, what an absurd thing. Like, what a weird thing. Like, to take a boring rom-com and add this also stupid but like just weird premise. I thought that was fun. It was interesting, novel, and I think I liked that because it was a good compromise between these two things. It was a good little bit of mental chewing that might have just been no big deal to other people. They might have felt like, "Oh yeah, sure, like whatever." And we're doing this rom-com thing, and like the waifus are pretty or whatever, and the action is not very good. But anyway, some people might enjoy it, whatever. It's an edgy show. My point is that people have different amounts of that mental chewing that they want, and I feel like everybody wants some of both. You might think that you don't want any of one or the other. You want no, kind of stupid, you could say if you were being mean, but like relaxing entertainment. Or some people might say they want no chewy, or you might say difficult or dense entertainment. I don't like those words for those things, but what are you going to do? Okay. People have mostly negative words for these things. I wonder why. Anyway, but everybody wants some of both from time to time. Nobody likes eating the exact same thing every day forever. There are, well, okay, if you're that one person, fine, but you get what I'm trying to say. People do want some amount of novelty, some amount of familiarity. But why does it differ so much? What different people want? Are some people like more acclimated to one or the other? Is there a kind of is there one that most humans would enjoy more of, but we just don't know because of our biases, or does our society take too much work to live in, so we don't enjoy as much of the novelty as we would, but we would all enjoy novelty? Or is the novelty more self-satisfying than I believe it is? And in fact, most people would enjoy more familiarity, but we're just stuck up about ourselves. Like, we don't know, we can't know. But isn't that weird? Like, why do we have such seemingly very different amounts of preference for that? Why am I addicted to doing a new thing every single time I make a parlay video, and other people would find this job mentally debilitating to the point of needing to stop? Like, why though? Like, what did I do that made me this way, you know? And by the way, I've often experienced, because I'm this kind of person, that people tend to treat the people who want the nuanced thing as being better. Please stop that. It makes me very self-conscious. Like, there's nothing better about wanting weird things all the time. It is worse in many ways. It means that I don't get familiar with something and settle on preferences. I know what I like a little bit less than some other people do because I don't have the same thing very frequently. I often don't enjoy things. I often take unprofitable risks because I'm just addicted to nuance or something. I don't know what's going on. I frequently need more to chew on mentally to the point of it being a problem. Like, I have trouble resting because I'm bored, like, way too easily. Another way people say this is in coffee tasting, like, you aren't you're gonna dislike the bad coffee more than the people who don't like the good coffee as much, who haven't had as much of the good stuff. The bad stuff gets worse while the good stuff gets better. Now, I would argue that if you have control over your living situation, this is a good trade, which is why I do it. I have control. Why do I need to drink bad coffee? I can just drink good coffee. But even some pretty good coffee, I will drink and think this is boring. When, like, that coffee is flawless. It's just not exciting. What's the big deal? Like, what's wrong with that coffee? You know, there's a coffee I'm having right now that, like, it's immaculate, like, free of defect, but it's just kind of boring to me. And, like, I don't want that. I feel bad. Like, I'm wasting this thing because I just can't get it up for the less interesting coffee now. Like, that's so stupid, you know? It is really, like, do not treat one or the other as being good. There is, to be honest with you, I think, some balance that is superior in some way. If weird story superiority is to be employed, it's in moderation. There is some balance of including nuance and including familiarity that I believe is more optimal. And I personally think that deep down, if we were all given a perfectly objective environment, which we will never have, we would all relatively agree on what amount of that is, like, more optimal or more satisfying. But none of us have any idea what it is. And I think it's pretty clear that if you're doing an extreme, it's probably bad. Like, there's some significant problems with doing either extreme. Again, you can be like me, where I'm kind of a, you know, people say a workaholic. I think of myself as a playaholic sometimes. Like, I can't not be doing an active thing. I just can't. It's not that my attention span is bad. It's great, but only for something that asks for an unreasonably large amount of my attention sometimes, which is inconvenient. Like, I want to rest, but I just can't. Like, it doesn't feel good, you know? Likewise, obviously, it would be unsatisfying to live a life where your natural state was to include no nuance. You would be bored, but want not to add in the things you are bored because you don't have. That would be bad. There are people they're looking for hobbies, but their natural state is to not do new things. So they have great difficulty looking for something to occupy themselves, which they want. Like, it gets to the point where you're not benefiting from your natural preference, no matter whether it's the more, relaxing entertainment or the more involved entertainment. But too much of both is, I think, pretty obviously bad. So it's some compromise somewhere. And I think it's both pretty surprising, remarkable, interesting that people have as different preferences for amounts of those two things as they do. And I also believe that there probably is a relatively objective balance, but I don't know how you would find it. I guess it doesn't really matter. We all have different amounts of energy consumed throughout the day, too. So it's not like we're all arriving at the same place. But if we were all trapped in a spaceship with nothing to do, uh, maybe because there was some global pandemic, I can't really imagine. But if for some reason we had to all be inside for years on end, uh, cooped up with nothing to do, I think it would come out that overall people have like a certain trend of preferences if they're given a reasonable amount of time. Like during the pandemic, which of course it did happen, unfortunately, you noticed probably that the average person lacked hobbies, which to me is comical. I could never lack hobbies. I could have infinite free time forever, and I would never run out of stuff to do, and I would be entertained 24/7 forever. Because I've devoted my entire life toward that because I think that is the point of being alive. I don't see why it's worth earning a living if you don't have things you want to do. Other people kind of didn't do that. I know there's someone in my life right now who's retired and they have nothing to do. They didn't figure out what they want to live for. They just kind of did it and now they're done kind of early and they just have nothing. Or like people who win the lottery or are really rich. There are Reddits for these things where you see like these people are not happy because they have nothing. Their life is just empty. That's not a problem. There's loads of things to do, but you have to cultivate that. There's a balance to be had, and it depends on your situation in life. That's kind of my point. But I think it's interesting how, for one reason or another, people have less nuance overall. Maybe that is just harder to get. I don't know. But that's the direction I chose to take this parlay in. Again, I think Mr. Foot, mostly my response is your observation that there is sort of a function to stories that are very proficiently told, but maybe don't make you engage as much, and stories that are awkward, but then you do the work and that could cause you to enjoy the nuance in the story. It's good to have some of both. I think that observation is just sensible, interesting. And mostly what I have to say about it is like, but what do we do? Like how much of each one do we enjoy? And of course, to be aware that there's a barrier that seems to be keeping people from crossing over to maybe enjoying one or the other. I think a lot of people, again, kind of assume that the other thing is just kind of stupid or misguided when they're misunderstanding. They're obviously both very clearly useful for different things. People can act shallow about them. But that's those people, not the thing. I do think people want an easy answer, sure. And so it looks like, that thing is not that deep because look, those people enjoying it are not that deep. And those are the more visible people. The vocal 20% minority of a community is always the stupidest and most annoying. And so we tend to think the whole game is like that, when mostly it's probably perfectly pleasant people. I did actually have a thought in there. I think it's noteworthy that the people appreciating the supposedly deeper and often kind of fetishized like art with this deeper meaning in it, those people too are like shallow, obnoxious jerks about their thing, at least the service 20%. They're not any less kind of stupid about their thing they supposedly enjoy, fetishize, than the people enjoying the recreational thing, supposedly the less deep thing. And I think that's telling. I'm being so judgmental to all humans, but whatever. I mean, what did you come here for, really? I think that's telling that even in the case where people want to enjoy like the deeper thing, this isn't like you're an ignorant person, so you need a weird story to make you engage. No, no, no. I think this is true of most people. If you're not a professional film analyzer, and even most of those people probably don't do this, you're gonna go along with the film unless it digs you in. It's not gonna hurt for the film to ask for more of your attention if it's trying to put your attention on something. This is something that benefits everyone. There's not like better people who just don't need this. I don't think. I think it's interesting to think how You might think of it as being more difficult to access those like deeper meanings. But I would argue that at the very least, the people enjoying that thing are not more proficient. The film is doing the extra work. The the show or the video game or the novel. The novel is the thing that's doing the additional work. It's not the people consuming it necessarily. Sure, those people have probably cultivated that skill, but I think that's more worth saying. Neither does it take more work to make that kind of work. Obviously, making your Avengers Endgame takes equally, if not arguably, more work, but it's just different. The effort needed is different. There really is no way that either of them is better or worse. They are just different. It's much more helpful to not think of them as movies or novels or stories, but to think of them as a specific goal. To see a new thing and not think this is a movie, this is how I feel about movies. No, that doesn't matter. This is a game, this is how I feel about games. That doesn't matter. That's not useful. You would want to think, I think, what is the goal of this thing? I don't know. Maybe I could try to figure out what the goal is by looking at the trailer, the marketing, I guess, what that studio or producer has done before might be decent. None of these are perfect. In fact, I don't do most of those things either. I don't think they're that helpful. But it's better than nothing. Like, it's better than assuming based on the medium, what the thing is. So yeah, I think that's most of what I have to say. I felt like that was a bit preachy. Is that bad? I have a strong opinion about this. I'm going to read what Mr. Foot wrote for this parlay. And again, I'd like you to think about, especially folks who have parlay and are commissioning parlay videos or are thinking about commissioning a parlay video. You can tell me to put it in my own words, but here's Mr. Foot's way of saying it. Do you think that is better? So I quote, Mr. Foot says, I have a hypothesis. Are weird stories just better than normal ones? Obviously not always, and there's a topic of personal preference and mental strain and whatever, but I think there's some truth in that because I'm a genius. It's crossed out. I've had this thought for a while, but this observation became clear when I watched Death on the Nile in cinemas this year. I'll say it like this, there's nothing objectively wrong with that movie. Quite the contrary, it was created competently. The actors and crew did a great job, and the original is a classic and well-regarded work of detective fiction. But nonetheless, I was bored out of my mind watching it in the cinema, and I think that was because it was too normal. My brain knows what to expect from this type of story, and it shuts off pretty quickly. There might have been some great character themes and messages, some genuinely good art in that movie, but I was never motivated to seek it out because the movie didn't require that kind of thought. A couple months later, I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, and that was the complete opposite experience. Those who've seen the movie will probably agree that it gets relatively weird at times, at least compared to the previous example. And with that, I was forced to think about the movie, to follow it on the most basic level. Not because it was super complex and you need X IQ to understand it, but because I was unable to put it in any box in my mind. That's what weird things are. They are things that refuse to fit in boxes. And with that, I naturally began to ask why one would create a story like that. That movie is far from the weirdest story I ever saw, but it demonstrates the issue I'm trying to explain. In other words, when you see a weird story, you're forced to spend some mental energy to process what's going on. And with that mental energy, you begin to think about what the story has to say, almost by accident. With normal stories, there's no need to think about it because that's how a story is supposed to be. Weird stories are not better because they're better stories, but because they force you to think about the story that's there. There's also a discussion in here regarding the definition of a good story. This is a question that's been asked recently. That's true, there was a recent parlay about that, basically about what art is. But I define art, Mr. Foot says, like this. Art is not supposed to be good, it's supposed to make you feel something. I sometimes like to call it the idea. That's why I define art, good art, as things that evoke a strong emotion, a unique emotion, or the art evokes the emotion in an elegant way. Using this definition, the parlay becomes about why my, and maybe other people's emotions, are a lot stronger with these weird stories. Now tell me, is there some truth to my hypothesis, or is it complete and utter nonsense, dreamt up by a delusional psychopath to make sense of his opinion in this burning post-everything world? That's the parlay as it was written. Long, but personally I think this is a very well-written way to state the question. To be blunt, I currently feel this is better than the way I reworded it. Good example is it saved time, you could say it that way. But I'm curious what you all feel. Again, like they're different options. Mr. Foot themselves probably enjoyed me wording it my own way just because you already know what you wrote. But maybe you felt like it derailed it in a direction you didn't want, or maybe that's what you wanted. It's hard to say. You have the option. I don't really mind either way. It's not really more work either way. I do want to quickly, there's actually one thing I didn't get back to that I wanted to respond to. And I think it's just that the weird stories, as you put them, as you defined that, like I'm saying that I think it's good to have some of both. But why is it that some of us feel like even though it's good to balance the two, I think that weird stories are more valuable. I'm more excited when I find one that I like. Well, I think the reason is that it's easier to be fooled when a story is bizarre. Like if it's the things that make a story easy to interpret, to follow along with, are good at that. They're good at that thing. So if you watch a story that is made competently, like it's not going to be a disaster. It might be a snooze fest, but it's not going to be a disaster. If you want a relaxing piece of entertainment, you can't really be like fooled into thinking that will be one, but then it isn't. Like the whole thing is that it is a surface level, excellent thing, right? Whereas these weirder stories, well, the thing about them is that they're awkward. The thing that they're doing to get you to engage can be kind of bad, but it has a benefit. If that benefit isn't used, the story is just bad. Sometimes it's not entirely clear where that is. Is this a reasonable buildup to a worthwhile payoff, or is this story just going nowhere? You can't know as easily, don't you think? And so I personally think that you can't do this, but if you were able to confirm that a story was or wasn't going to be enjoyable for you, that would be a more valuable piece of information for weirder stories. Does that make sense? I think that's why, like, I'm just happier when I find like a good show and it's just odd. It's not because I really value it more or less per se. It's apples and oranges compared to the more relaxing show, but it's harder to find those shows, I think. I don't even think there are less of them. Again, it's just kind of harder to confirm. I'll give you a very quick example before I go. This parlay's gone a bit over time. The two anime, Higurashi and Summertime Rendering, are both anime with a similar-ish premise. A secluded Japanese island with the local shrine, and it's all hot in the summer, and kids are hanging out and trying to solve a mystery about some mysterious island disease in the summer. But initially, it is a little difficult to see what the differences between those stories will be. Now, personally, I think Higurashi is garbage that never goes anywhere. You like it, that's fine, but that's how I felt. And Summertime Rendering relatively quickly confirms that we are actually going to do something in this show. It isn't just fluff. Like there is like a plot that you can get invested in and twists that I enjoyed. I'm not saying one is better or worse, but just that they initially don't seem very different in my opinion. But I despised one of them. One of them is one of the worst things I've taken the time to watch for me, and another one I'm really enjoying. And it's not immediately apparent which one is which. Whereas, like, if you watched Avengers Endgame and that anime I mentioned before about the girl making out with the guy and she steals his memories, like, you can tell pretty quickly that Avengers Endgame is just a nicer product if you're going to go on the roller coaster ride. Like, that takes a few minutes of watching the piece, right? They are different, of course. It's not a perfect comparison. I'm just illustrating that I think it's easier to tell when something is like actually good when it's meant to be a relaxing work rather than a weird or there's some meaning to engage within it work, which sucks. But I do think that's a thing. So there you go. Lots of hot takes in this parlay because I started out with the coolest take of all time. They're both good. La la la. So I threw a bunch of fire bombs at you, which I hope you enjoyed. I feel pretty strongly about these topics. So again, it's perfectly fine if Higurashi is doing something different. It's doing a lot more of the like horror and tension and shock value thing too, which I just don't care about. So I do think it's not its fault that I didn't like those things. Like, that's just me. I could argue why I think it's like a worse piece of media, but like why, like it probably just had different goals. My point is simply that it was not clear as quickly what those goals were. Anyway, cool. I hope that was fun. I had a good time with it. I hope you can see I'm very involved in this parlay. Nice one.